the heart and soul behind every business. Stories. Welcome to Business Story of the Week, hosted by me, Joshua Laurie. From setbacks to comebacks, from tragedies to triumphs, we inspire entrepreneurs through conversations that matter. Witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. Whether it's your career, business, or life, your success is always one story away. This is Business Story of the Week. And welcome back, folks. Welcome back to Business Story of the Week. I am your host, Joshua. And our question for today is, what does it take, or what did it take, for a family owned Caribbean medical school to revolutionize healthcare education in the region? And that is quite the story that we are going to have today, because our guest is the perfect guest to answer that question. Kaushik Guha. Well, he has an impressive background in finance and strategic management, coupled with his diverse experience in project management and economic consulting. He has equipped that those experiences has equipped him with the tools needed to lead St. James School of Medicine to new heights, keeping high education affordable. Unlike other Caribbean medical schools backed by private equity, St. James School of Medicine operates as a family owned institution. This unique model allows the school to focus on the well being of its students and the future of healthcare rather than being dictated by the demands of funders. As a result, St. James can provide and prioritize the quality of education and services, ensuring that the needs of the people are at the heart of its mission. And today, Koshik is going to share this mission of his and share, quite what they built with St. James Medical School of Medicine. Koshik, how are you doing? Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Joshua. I appreciate it. It is an honor to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me.
Koshik, I am quite excited to talk about St. James and the school, the institution that you guys have set up, and it's quite the story, of course, and the mission that you guys are trying to achieve. But before we start really getting into it, I want to know the story of Kaushik Guha. I mean, literally the name of the second name of the show is story, and we love stories on this show. Can you share with us about your diverse background? You have
Sure.
finance, strategic management, project management. It led you to your current role here in St. James School of Medicine. Have you always known you were going to be in finance, as project management, but more importantly, did you always know you were going to set up a medical school? What is the story of Kaushik Dua?
So, um, you know, it all started off when I eventually migrated to the United States.
Hmm.
So, my parents
Hmm.
have always been in the United States.
Hmm.
And me and my sister were actually sent back. I'm originally from India, sent us back to India,
Hmm.
where we got our undergrads, both
I
me and my
see.
sister.
Hmm.
And eventually we moved back to the United States after finishing our undergrad. And I worked here for 2 years as a marketing analyst. My undergrad was in economics. I had a triple major in economics, statistics, and math, and didn't quite really know what to do with it. And then eventually, when I was here in the United States, I started meeting people, and they were like, "Oh, wow, you have a very unique combination of majors. You
Hmm.
should really think about being a consultant." And I had no idea what consulting was. And then I dug around a little bit, and everybody said, "Yeah, you need to have at least a master's to be a consultant." So that's exactly what I did. I went and got my master's. I got an MBA in finance, and then I got into economic consulting or applied economic consulting, which is a very niche field. I worked
Okay.
there for about 9 years, almost a decade,
Hmm.
different
Wow.
firms, and it truly taught me a lot. While I
Hmm.
was there, I essentially was focusing on the food industry, or the
Right.
food and beverage industry, where
Mm-hmm.
I had clients, huge Fortune 100 food and beverage companies, fast food companies, parent
Mm-hmm.
companies,
Mm-hmm.
drink manufacturers, like huge, companies that are making 30, 40 billion a year,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which really piqued my interest with generally food management because
Right.
when you talk to a local restaurateur, they always keep telling you that, oh, margins are thin, but then you have these big box
Right.
companies where they're killing it. Like even if you look at
Mm-hmm.
Chipotle's P&L, their margins are well over 10%. They're closer
Mm-hmm.
to 20%, whereas you
Mm-hmm.
will never find a local mom and pop shop having that kind of margin.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
was really intrigued, and I was like, you know what, with all my experience, maybe I can have a restaurant
Right.
and have higher margins because I'm smarter than
Right.
average people. And boy, was I wrong. So I quit my job. I started a restaurant, and man, I can tell you, I was so incredibly wrong. The margins
Mm-hmm.
were just razor thin.
Mm-hmm.
It Things just didn't add up.
Mm-hmm.
I started a restaurant in Chicago. I went from one location to two locations, and we were at almost $1 million in revenue
Mm-hmm.
for the restaurants, which was very good. But I was breaking even. I was not making any money.
Wow.
And then the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, and in the meantime, I was actually running the school as well.
All right. All
So the
right.
school was founded by my father. But
Mm-hmm.
when the pandemic hit, I truly had to make a very difficult choice as to
There you
which
go.
business do I want
Mm-hmm.
to see through this particular crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad I chose the school because restaurants have gone through so much upheaval since
Yeah.
then,
It's true. That is true.
and the entire business and operating model in restaurants has completely changed. So I made a
Mm-hmm.
conscious decision in May 2020 to fold the restaurants. Though, again, I was making not making money, but at least I was breaking even. I wasn't losing money.
Right.
And
Right.
we had some pretty interesting exit strategies being planned. There was a much larger chain based out in New
Mm.
York that was
I
planning
see.
to
Mm-hmm.
open up doors in Chicago, and they wanted to do that by buying out my restaurant and rebranding it as theirs. And
Mm-hmm.
I was absolutely okay with that, and I would
Right.
basically be eventually working for them.
Mm-hmm.
But none of that panned out because of the pandemic, because they were struggling just like any other restaurant.
Wow.
And then I pivoted back to St. James. So at St. James, I've kind of taken over from my father in 2017 onwards.
Mm-hmm.
And my father is obviously a fantastic man, and honestly a very unique individual, because he's one of the few people I have met in my life who
Mm-hmm.
truly has never been influenced or encouraged or motivated by money.
Wow.
And it is his mission that the school pushes through.
Wow.
His philosophy, and it is mine now, that money is always an effect. You
Mm.
do
Of
something
course.
well, money will come to you.
Of
If you're a
course.
good singer, you will get money because you sing well and you sing with passion. You cannot
Right.
become a singer because singers are rich. You
Yes.
cannot
Yes.
become an actor because actors are rich. This is his
Mm-hmm.
philosophy. He was a professor all his life, and eventually said that, you know what, I want a school that is putting students first, and not a school where people are constantly trying to exit from
Right.
the business and
Mm-hmm.
make oodles and oodles of money.
Yes.
Which, in my opinion, is a conflict of interest just across the board, and we can get into
Mm-hmm.
that later on if you
Yes. Of
wish.
course. Mm-hmm.
Just general corporate finance, or the approach of corporate finance in America, I think is flawed, in the
Yes.
sense that it's great for short term
Right.
exponential growth,
Short-term
but
gain.
it
Mm-hmm.
is absolutely terrible for long term sustainability.
All right. Well, this is quite the topic that we were about to get into, and of course, I love the background. I love the story that you just said, Kaushik. It feels like you really met a crossroads. Like you had to decide, wait, wow, am I going to get back? Am I really going to do restauranting? The restaurant tour, like, but you had to choose between almost like um the 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 path that you wanted to
Mhm.
start on versus a more let's say, noble path, but also it's a family owned business. It's a family owned institution, right? And we all have this. I believe every part of a family institution organization always has this kind of chip on their shoulders for saying, I'm going to pave my own path. I don't want to feel like it was given to me. I wanted to ask if that was something that you went through as well, because I personally, for me, it was the same for me. I didn't want to get involved with the family business for a long time, but eventually I did, and it was great. But talk to us about, of course, you went through your restauranting business, and I always said that when you I will never get into F&B. By the way, I always tell my friends I'll never get into F&B. I did work in a Japanese restaurant for 2 years.
Right,
So I knew the ins and out. I was
right.
mentored. I had a great mentor who taught me all of that. And seeing it from that background, seeing it from that perspective, I said, you will be in the red for the first 5 years. Luckily, if you were lucky, you're probably, be profitable after 5 years, if you're
Right,
lucky, right?
right.
But it's quite the undertaking. You went from being a restaurateur to taking on, the family institution. Talk
Mhm.
to us about that transition, and how did you deal working with family?
So, as I said, I was a consultant for 10 years.
Hmm.
And consultants are a different breed of people. Um,
Yes.
Very self assured, very confident, uh, maybe to a fault.
Hmm.
And I was
Hmm.
exactly that person. The
Right.
restaurants, if nothing else, were an incredibly humbling experience
Hmm.
where the markets clearly told me that I definitely did not have the wherewithal
Hmm.
to really be successful. And it's not just
Right.
that, it's great. So in 5 years, I ran my restaurant for about 7 years. And in
Right.
7 years, I was breaking even.
Hmm.
I wasn't really making a whole lot of money. It was peanuts, literally, like a couple of $1,000s at the end of it that
Wow.
was left over,
Wow.
which is nothing. And mind you, we were doing revenues of about 1 million.
Oh
um,
goodness.
and that's just how much it costs. And there were so
I-
many variables. When I started my restaurant in 2013, 2014, that's
Mhm.
when this whole debate about minimum wage started coming up.
Right.
So for the longest time, minimum wage was something we never even considered or thought about
Mhm.
because minimum wage was stagnant for 5 years before that.
Mhm.
And I didn't
Mhm.
even build it into my business plan because I thought it would stay steady, or at least the growth would be steady, but it wasn't. I
Right.
mean, it went up, and there were a lot of unforeseen situations. But while I was at my restaurant, it was a truly humbling experience. And I have so much respect for entrepreneurs across the board because
Mhm.
of that, because the kind of
Mhm.
grit and stamina, some of the things that you just mentioned, that they have, it's just truly remarkable.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and you know but that being said, I was working before, and I was working with extremely qualified and intelligent people.
Right.
And then you go into restaurants because you think you're also very qualified and intelligent, and then you have this incredibly humbling experience. But I think
Mhm.
that that was truly required for me.
Right.
um, Coming from a family, like my parents were originally Indian. Me and my sister are obviously American.
Mhm.
um, their outlook on family is probably a little different from the average American family that you see, in the
Right.
sense that they, as parents, they do everything, as I think even in America we do a lot of that. Everything's for our kids,
Yes. Of course.
and that's truly what the focus was. Obviously,
Mhm.
my father was like, "Hey, I want to do this because I want to create a change in the education industry, which
Yes.
is very profit driven, whether it's a not for profit or not."
Of course. Of course.
I mean, and we can talk a little bit about the endowment funds that these
Oh,
big
interesting. Mhm.
Ivy League schools have. And if you look at these big Ivy Leagues, you're talking about billions and billions of dollars that
Yes.
they're
Of course.
hoarding. This is wealth that
Hoarding.
they're hoarding.
Mm.
They're If they truly want it, and together, if you look at how many students that these guys are educating,
Mm.
it's not commensurate with the kind of money that they have.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and you can call it not for profit all you want, but the reality is
Uh huh.
that these are institutions that are entirely, almost exclusively focused
Exclusively.
on making more money.
Right. 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 Right.
Yes, and I've had this debate and argument with other folks in the. I'm sorry, I think we just had a power failure or something like that.
Okay, it's all right.
Um,
We can edit this
but can you
part
see
out.
me just fine?
It's fine. It's all right.
All right. So one of the biggest things that these other folks say, oh, we invest a lot in research. And yes, there's definitely merit to that. There's intangible benefits to
Mm-hmm.
research. I don't
Mm-hmm.
deny that. But at the same time, the sole focus
Ooh.
of an educational institution has to and should be education,
Yes, of course.
which is something that we don't see in the United States. When I was in grad school, my tuition went up by 35% year on year.
Wow.
Um, Not even year on year. Yeah, it was year on year. And semesterly, there was a consistent increase.
Hmm.
Education in the United States has gone to a point where it's become a privilege. It's either an
That's right.
academic, you have to be academically privileged, or you need to be financially privileged.
Of course, of
This
course.
is out of reach for the middle class. And this is something
Yes.
that my father wanted to change for us because we were growing
Wow.
up in the United States and he wanted to set an example. And I think now that we've been through all of that,
Hmm.
I want to, I think it's a very noble mission that he started.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
want to continue that mission as
Right.
long as I can. That
Right.
is, provide a safe haven, so to speak,
Hmm.
where people are truly selected on merit,
Hmm. Hmm.
irrespective, and it should be affordable.
Right.
Our
Of
entire
course.
program really costs about $120,000 for the entire program. The average cost of medicine in the United States right now is close to quarter of a million. We're at
Wow.
less than half.
Yes, of course.
Um, and believe it or not, we have a lot of students whose families make less than $95,000 a year.
Oh,
Now, that
of
is something
course.
I am truly proud of. And it's
Wow.
not like they're not paying or they're on loan. It's not that. It's
Mhm.
that
It's
been
simply
given an opportunity. They're
yes.
working hard. Their families are working hard, and they're fulfilling their dues by paying us, and we're
Hmm.
fulfilling it by making the physicians. A few years ago, we had a situation where one of our students graduated and became a doctor, matched into residency. She called me and she was crying on the phone. And I was like, is everything okay? And she's like, no, I just wanted to thank you because, my dad works at a small envelope factory in an assembly
Yeah.
line, and my
Oh,
mom is a cleaning lady.
wow.
And little med school was out of the question,
Hmm.
but my parents weren't even qualified because they were and she's DACA. So they were kind of on the fringe. They couldn't get proper loans and stuff like that. But this student, fantastic
Wow.
student, came out on top,
Wow.
knocked it out of the park with her scores. And now she's in her residency, but she'll be a full fledged physician in about a year or two. And
Wow.
we essentially created an engine for economic upliftment,
There you go. There you go.
um, which is something that universities in the which every university should be, but
Hmm. But are
universities in the United
failing.
States are no longer like that.
Precisely, and that is exactly. I love that you created an engine for economic uplifting because I mean, education. We're talking costs that are putting not only uplifting people, but actually, burdening people. I mean,
Yeah,
talk about student loans, right? It's become truly a privilege to get education in the United States, and it's lovely and it's beautiful how you talk about it as well, and it feels like you've always seen this cause that your father has started and that you are now continuing. Again, unlike many other Caribbean schools or medical schools, St. James is family owned. You're not
yeah,
backed by private equity, and this unique model allows you to influence the school's priorities and give quality education. And talk to us a little bit more about the challenges when it came to this, when providing this. Of course, it makes it feel like it's possible. It's possible to provide affordable education. It's not just always going to be for profit. You also mentioned right before this interview, you mentioned that the Caribbean uh, education industry is like in $1 billion industry.
Right, it is.
So, where does St. James School of Medicine fit into all of that, and what are the challenges and obstacles you've had to overcome?
Right. So we are the seventh largest medical school in the
Right, right.
Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
We're the largest family-owned medical school. Um, I would like to caveat that that sounds impressive, and we've been around for 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
We're only the fifth school, I believe, that crossed that landmark
Wow.
time period. So we're only the fifth school to be around for that long in the Caribbean. But
Mm-hmm.
one thing I
Mm-hmm.
do want to caveat is that the big five schools before us are massive. Like they're pulling in 700 plus students a year. They're generating revenues of
Wow.
at least 200 to 300 million a year. And there are
Wow.
five schools like that. Our school, on the other hand, is dramatically smaller. Maybe so we get about half the number, and our tuition is one third. Actually, the most
Right.
of the big Caribbean schools are actually more expensive than U.S. schools.
Oh, what?
So in the U.S., you would spend about a quarter of a million to go to med school. In
Uh-huh.
the Caribbean, in the big schools, you're going to spend 400,000.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so just to give you an example, some of the biggest schools have their semesterly tuition at 35,000 a year, and which is this is not
Mm-hmm.
really a semester. It's a essentially a trimester. So three
Mm-hmm.
times, so it's 100,000 per year essentially, and it's a
Right.
4 year
Mm-hmm.
program. So you're paying four hundred
My
thousand.
goodness. Mm-hmm.
And there are people who do this, who pay
Yes.
and they go, and then the government is providing loans for these guys, and they're going to school. And
Mm-hmm.
again, the big Caribbean schools, their education is honestly comparable to any American school, and they're
Right.
just as good.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, I would say they're actually a little bit better because they have a
Right.
chip on their shoulder, and
Mm.
and with that money, they do get a lot of resources. There's no question about that. But
Of
our
course.
school
Of course.
is the seventh largest, and we have only about 300 students, and we have our tuition is about 120,000 for the entire program, so about one fourth of what a bigger Caribbean school charges. Now, when you break it down, and this is kind of going back to what I mentioned, that I think the whole approach of corporate finance in the United States is flawed, and I'm not talking about the theory. I'm talking about the approach. Theory, obviously, United States is cutting edge. Our research, our a lot of our financial models that have been created that are used globally, USA is the pioneer. That's not what I'm critiquing. I am critiquing
Mm-hmm.
our approach to running businesses. Everybody in the United States wants to start a business with the expectation of having an exit. And to
Yes.
me, this is a little baffling because how are you going to have an exit? Like, I've met so many startup entrepreneurs who are especially in IT. All they're looking at is I want to be there for about 5 to 7 years, and then I want to sell it to private equity, and then I want to walk away.
Wow. Yeah.
This is
That
just
is.
such an incredibly flawed view,
Mm-hmm.
and it's an unsustainable view. On
Mm-hmm.
the flip side, when you look at corporate finance in Japan, for example,
Yep.
their view is very different, which is why they have so many more long life companies. I'm not saying that these companies don't have economic troubles or economic problems, but they're
Yes. Of course.
surviving.
Mm-hmm.
Every CEO that comes in, I think Elon Musk just got approved for a $50
Yep.
billion.
$50 billion
Um,
pay package. Mm-hmm.
and realistically, one human being cannot physically spend
Absolutely.
that kind of money. There's no
In a
need
lifetime.
to have
No
$50
way.
billion.
Absolutely. There's no need.
So what all entrepreneurs think of, young or old, is like, I'm going to start this and I'm going to exit in about 5 years, and I want that kind of a pay package.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that when you do that kind of a pay, if a private equity firm comes and pays you that kind of money, realistically speaking, they're not. And mind you, Tesla actually is not a profit making company.
Yep.
But the private equity firm or whoever is footing that bill
Yes.
will not be able to make that money. So somebody
Ever.
eventually loses out. And what we're
Yes.
doing is that we're kicking this can to future
Yes.
generations.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's not us, it's all on debt. It's going out somewhere. Then eventually, if
Yes.
Tesla becomes, say, quote unquote, too big to fail, the
Hmm.
government will come and bail it out. How are they bailing out? By increasing their deficit. Who's going to
Exactly.
manage the deficit? Our kids when they grow up, not
Precisely.
us. And this
Precisely.
is the problem that I truly have with our approach to corporate finance, which
Hmm.
is why as a family business, we've been a little leery about
Hmm.
dealing with private equity firms because, yes,
Yes.
they have a lot of money,
Hmm.
but their sole goal is to come in and try to make 20 to 30% profit margins.
Yes. All the
We don't
time.
have that. We had that flexibility.
Hmm.
If you have a conversation with my father, who's our CEO, and we tell him, hey, we had a 10% margins this year, he's like, that's terrible because that means that that's 10% of money that we should have spent on our students.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Beautiful. Wow.
yeah, and these are things that if you're private equity backed, somebody will come and say, "Hey, you only had 10%. Why isn't it 30?"
Why? Exactly. Exactly.
And then how are you going to get 30? I mean, and let's face it, the only way you can possibly increase margins is by increasing revenue or cutting costs. And
Precisely.
cutting costs essentially leads to quality issues.
Hmm.
And increasing revenue is essentially you're putting pressure on the students. So
Exactly.
we do have that flexibility where we don't need to do any of that because we can uh, stay well within our wheelhouse, so to speak,
There
where
you go.
we
There
don't
you go.
need to have a $50 billion pay package. Nobody needs that
Nobody needs
realistically.
that.
You
Precisely.
need to have a good life, which I think all of our employees
Hmm.
do. We're
Hmm.
not like rich. Nobody's driving to work in a Lamborghini, which you
Hmm.
also see in a lot of these bigger schools. But
Hmm.
we all of us, every single person working, have comfortable lives, have decent families.
Hmm.
We all get to save for our kids' education and
There
all
you
that.
go. There you go.
And that I think is the true problem with Caribbean medical schools because
Yeah.
it's come to a point where private equity firms are putting so much pressure that a lot of people are actually thinking that Caribbean medical schools are not even sustainable.
Yeah.
And to a certain degree, that might be true because if you are expecting 20, 30, 40% margins
Hmm.
over a prolonged period of time, that is any business is unsustainable at that point.
Hmm.
And it is
Precisely.
the advent and the introduction of private equity in this particular business model that is
Right.
rendering a lot of businesses, you know,
Precisely.
unsustainable.
And this is probably the bane of capitalism, is it not? It is what is it's bleeding into schools, it's bleeding into
Yes.
educational institutions because everything is for profit. And
Yes.
what I always keep hearing, and I love hearing this whenever I hear it, it's like the, when it comes to corporations, equities, and like profit margins and all that, it's always the goal of like how do you get bigger, like infinite growth, always
Yes.
being in the green after the next quarter, infinite growth in a finite economy. And like you said, who is going to foot that bill eventually? Someone gets paid $50 billion. Who's going to foot it? What if in the
Yes.
educational sectors, in educational institutions, $200 million in profit for a year in a school? That to me is unthinkable. What are you doing? It's a for-profit institution in the first
Yeah.
place? That's what it tells me, right?
Yeah.
So what's happening? Who's footing that bill? It's the children. And the students,
Yeah.
the students who are
It's the
supposed to be
students, the
receiving
children.
precisely,
It's the American public through the deficit. Look at our deficit. When
exactly.
Bill Clinton was president, I think that was the last time USA had a positive balance of payments. Now
Hmm.
we're in massive deficits, and it's constantly growing. And and that's largely because USA is in a very unique position in
Hmm.
the sense being the most quote unquote most powerful country in the world.
Mm.
It can print money.
Yes,
Most other countries, if they printed money, they would have
it
their
would
economies will go on
economy. Yeah,
free fall.
yes, precisely.
Whereas USA, it's called quantitative easing. We do
Hmm.
that quite a bit.
Hmm.
At least in my lifetime that I know of, we've definitely done it at least
Hmm.
twice. During the pandemic
Wow,
was one. We essentially went and
wow.
printed money and gave it up, but that
Hmm.
didn't devalue anything. What it did was it created a deficit, and then
Hmm. And
That's
we're
what our kids are going to face.
precisely.
And eventually, and that's what I think is a big problem. I know a lot of economists and finance professionals
Hmm.
point to Japan and say that, oh, look at Japan. Japan's a terrible country. If you've ever been to Japan, their quality
Hmm.
of life is fantastic.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Despite a dwindling economy, their per capita GDP is kind of going up. And
Right.
so as a result, their quality of life is improving.
Hmm.
So this, as you pointed out, Joshua, this view that we constantly have to grow
Yeah.
is not a healthy view.
At all. Hmm.
And I think at some point, maybe not in our lifetimes, and I
Hopefully.
hope it's not in our kids' lifetime, but at
Oh
some point,
goodness. At some point.
things will come to pass because
Hmm.
of this incredible deficit. And there's, let's face it,
Hmm.
let's talk a little bit about politics. None of the political parties are really doing anything concrete to
Hmm.
do it. The politicians have vested interests in trying to get elected.
Hmm.
CEOs have vested interests in trying to get the biggest pay package so they can,
Yes.
as you call it, the golden parachute.
Hmm.
Um, the worst part is that the average CEO tenure in a Fortune 500 or publicly traded company is 3 years.
Wow.
How can you possibly have a company last forever when you have a CEO who's making decisions to essentially make himself look good in the near term? And he's not thinking
Absolutely.
about the long term.
Hmm.
We saw what happened with Yahoo, right? Like
Yeah.
Yahoo was a massive, basically imploded, which was,
Hmm.
it was a uh,
A
internet
big, big. Yep.
behemoth. Like there
Yes.
was Google
Exactly.
and
It was
Yahoo,
cool. Yeah. Yep.
and then you hired a CEO who's trying to make a name for themselves or trying to enrich themselves, and they have a short-term view. They're not looking at 15 years down the road what happens to
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
business. They're making short-term decisions, and it
Right now.
severely affected them.
Hmm.
And eventually, the whole company imploded, and now Yahoo is a shell of what it used
Yes.
to be.
Precisely. It is a. It's
and
a
and
false.
that's the problem. We cannot have, and that's the difference between a family owned business and a big
Yes.
business.
Yes.
Where a family
Precisely.
owned business is, we're not in it for the exit.
There you go.
We're not in it for the incredibly high margins. We're
Hmm.
in it for sustainability because we
There you
want to
go.
have not just a legacy, but
Hmm.
this is our bread and butter. Like
Precisely.
if the school doesn't isn't there for some reason or the other, I don't have a living to make.
Hmm.
Similarly, 109 other people in our school don't have a living to make, and
Hmm.
that's, I think, the true difference between a publicly traded company and a family-owned
Yes.
business,
Of course.
where we
Precisely.
have the liberty to prioritize certain things. For
Hmm.
example, if a lot of companies in the United States don't make a dime, like Uber Eats, another
Yes.
company.
Yes.
Massive company, CEOs are making massive pay packages,
Everything. Yep.
but at the same time, they haven't made a dime in profits.
Yes.
So, but if you were to go and value that company today, Uber Eats
Mhm.
would be worth a lot more than us.
Yes.
But in
Absolutely.
theory, how is that possible? A school that's been profitable for 25 years, pretty much continuously, versus a business that hasn't made a dime in profits. How is
Mhm.
that business more valuable? It's all about perception, and that's what I
Yes.
kind of say, that the corporate finance approach in the
Hmm.
United States is absolutely flawed,
It
and
is
we're
absolutely
just
fun.
kicking the can down the road
There you
without
go.
really truly understanding what the
There you
repercussions
go.
would be eventually.
That is a great way to put it. And it's exactly what's happening, kicking the can down the road because something has got to give eventually,
Yeah.
right? And I love how you again. It feels like it's just we literally had this conversation last night with me and my friends and my siblings, my sister. It's like it's almost like how do you we're in a point of no return when it comes to the wealth gap, right? And this is bleeding into, again, this is due to corporate finance. You as yourself as an economic strategist and someone who's very familiar with this, it's like, how do you stop this? Because you can't put a cap on wealth. But how do you put a cap on wealth and people receiving $50 billion, right? And this relates back to this relates back to institutions that like the St. James Medical School, because uh, it actually reminds me of a company, a gaming company. It's called Steam, It's probably the only big gaming company that isn't publicly funded. It's not. It didn't never ever went public, but that allowed them to create quality games. It allowed them to constantly, just tweak and give quality. Their operations are sound. They have good, customer support, and all these other games that are coming out, they're all bad quality. And it to me, it that is a reminder of what you guys do at St. James, because you guys can now not focus on profits but focus on sustainability, which is the bane of corporate finance, the bane of capitalism and where we are right now. And this is where I'd like to ask, because it seems like a giant, like it seems like a behemoth, the titan of our day, our society today, of our time, which is, how do you exist in such a predatory capitalistic society, but with goals like the St. James and what you do in the school? How do you exist in that sphere? How do you exist in that kind of economy? And how do you sustain yourself? How is
So
it possible?
that's a very good question. And
Mhm.
I'm going to bring this back to a very simple adage that
Mhm.
everybody uses is don't keep up with the Joneses.
Oh,
Um,
beautiful.
it is you do you. When
Mhm.
you're running a business,
Mhm.
a lot of people, again, because in America, in corporate finance, we're taught to do things in a certain way. You need to have
Yes.
returns, you need to maximize profit, etc., etc. If you're a
Mhm.
publicly traded company, you have a bunch of shareholders who have no idea how the business is run, but they want
Mhm.
to see profits. They don't care. I mean, it could be anything. Any publicly traded companies like that.
Precisely.
In our situation, we have standards. Obviously, we have to be accredited. We have to follow certain norms designed by the World Federation of Medical Education. But like, I'll give you some examples. Is that some of the bigger schools will come in and pay millions of dollars to hospitals, and
Mhm.
they will shut other competitors out. And this
Yes.
has happened before, to the point that like Caribbean schools that are backed by private equity would go into a hospital and say, I'm going to pay you the fees for the next 50 years or 25 years upfront today. And for the next 25 years, you don't have to worry about anything. You're not getting any other students, including the students at the local universities in that state. So
Mhm.
the state schools are very competitive. Obviously, most state schools have medicine programs, and they're a lot cheaper for in-state students, right?
Right.
But if you have all of a sudden a private equity-backed Caribbean medical school coming in and saying, "Hey, I'm going to pay you $50 million today," because their CEO is just
Mhm.
worried about, "Hey, I'm going to get $50 million. We're going to get all of this recognition right now, and that's a big accolade for me, so I can get a big pay package." But he's
Mhm.
not thinking about what happens down the road.
Yeah.
What happens to the same thing with the hospital? What happens to the hospital when they get the 50 million today and they burn through it in 3 years,
Yep.
and then they realize that that deal is for 10 years, and for 10 years they have no cash flows,
Right.
and it becomes more expensive for the students. It doesn't become
Yeah.
expensive for the Caribbean school; it becomes more
Yes.
expensive for the state school.
Mhm.
Um, and this is exactly what happens. So for us, we understand. I mean, genuinely are, like, my point of view is that the world doesn't have to be a zero sum game.
Yes.
There's enough
Yes.
resources, there are enough hospitals, for example,
Go around.
for us to coexist happily
Mhm.
with other schools within the same system. In
Mhm.
fact, having multiple schools in the same system, our view
Yes.
is that it actually leads to synergies and better students. And we
Mhm.
want that. So
Mhm.
you will never find us going to a hospital and asking for exclusive agreements, exclusive rights,
Mhm.
which is something that's very common. If we have a certain tie-up with hospital, we never demand that the hospital not take any other school. The hospital should do what's right by them, not do what's right by us. I mean, it's the same. I always used to say that um, just because, you know, chicken prices, when I was in the restaurant industry, just because chicken prices fluctuate doesn't mean I go and start a poultry farm. That
Right.
just doesn't make sense. So in the same way, stick to your lane, stick to know what you know, and don't compare yourself to competitors or the Joneses. Yes, if
Right.
somebody goes and pays $50 million to get exclusive rights, That's a strategy, and it works. It obviously it like leads to very quick growth in a very short period of time.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the tortoise always won the race.
Yeah.
Do you need the exponential growth? Why don't you just grow a little more steadily, keeping costs at in a controlled format so that you get more students? And
Mm-hmm.
organically, that's exactly what we've done. We started
Mm-hmm.
with 11 students in 1999, and today we intake about 300 students, and we reject a
Wow.
lot because
Wow.
it's been completely organic for us.
Wow. I
Whereas you
mean,
will have certain schools that started off with 11, 12. Within 3 years, they went to, 500. And then 10 years down the road, they're running into all sorts of problems because they are not prepared to scale at that level. And
fascinating.
long story short, to your answer, just don't compare yourself to the Joneses.
There you go.
Do what is fiscally responsible for the company. Do what
Yes.
is fiscally responsible for all the stakeholders, and by stakeholders I mean students as well as
Mm-hmm.
the employees and the faculty.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I always say that St. James is a people focused school
Mm-hmm.
and not a profit focused school.
Yes, beautiful. That's a great way to put it. People focused school, not a profit focused school. And St. James, you guys, it's possible. You're making it possible. You're showing that it's possible. Like you said, there's plenty to go around. We don't have to always be growing. We don't have to always be profiting. There is it's enough of this to go around to help uplift each other. We don't have to be hoarding everything, especially the education sector, right? Like,
Right.
what's the reason to hoard resources in the education sector? We are supposed to be uplifting people, and
Absolutely,
it's
especially when
mhm,
there's a dire need for
mhm.
physicians.
Yes.
I want to live in a world where physicians are relatively easily acceptable. If I need a
Mhm.
specialist for something, I want to live in a world where I can get them easily. Even to
Wow.
this day, if you need a special, try to get a dermatology appointment. It's going to take you 6 months if you haven't
Mhm.
had a
Mhm.
physician recommend you. It's just ridiculous, and the only reason is because there's a massive dearth of physicians across the board.
Precisely.
Why do you need to? And Joshua, since I have this platform, I want to say just one
Please.
reason I hate the term Shark Tank of that popular TV show. Why does it have to be Shark Tank? Why can't it be a
Mhm.
dolphin tank? Because
Mhm.
what,
Mhm.
sharks eat each other? Why do you have to eat each other in business? You don't have to
Exactly.
because the American economy is one of the largest economies, if not the largest economy in the world.
Mhm.
There's
Mhm.
plenty to go around. You don't
Yes,
have to be a
precisely.
shark.
Yeah, precisely. Precisely. I love it. I love it. I love this views, caution. I love that you are, you know, preaching this kind of perspective that I believe is needs to change when it comes to how we deal with the economy at large and how we approach things when it comes to profit and loss and margins and all that. We really need to change that perspective because it's killing us off. It's just like killing off
Yeah.
the economy. It's killing off the disadvantage, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Like we're stepping on them more and more instead of trying to help uplift people. I love that you are spearheading and forwarding this perspective, especially with what you do at St. James School of Medicine. You kind of already answered my final question in there, and just how do you see the future? You want more physicians, affordable, physician healthcare, and but how do you plan to address the evolving needs of healthcare, and how do you see St. James of Medical School of Medicine moving forward in the future?
So, the way we operate is not very traditional.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, we're not maximize profit or cut costs or
Mm-hmm.
increase revenue. Those are definitely concerns, and they have to be
Of course.
concerns to make a
Mm-hmm.
business
Mm-hmm.
sustainable. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not a driver. We will do things that will help our students the most. We're hoping, the hope is that students understand this. The hope is in the future, we're
Mm-hmm.
not even if I'm not involved with the school, I don't want a CEO who would come in and not prioritize the ideals that this particular institution was built on, which is
Right.
people,
Yes.
whether it's
Yes. Of
staff,
course.
faculty, or students.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to do is provide the best value for money.
Oh.
And I'm hoping that at some point down the road in the next 5 to 10 years, people see that and realize that, you know what, I want to go to St. James School of Medicine,
Wow.
not
Wow.
necessarily because it's the best, but because it is the best value for money. You cannot get a bigger bang for your buck anywhere else. And
Mhm.
that's our goal. That's our mission. That's what all 109 of us here work
Wow.
towards, that we want to be the best value for money. If you pay us something, you're going to see results that are 10, 20, 30 fold for your own benefit. And I think the
Mhm.
best investments are always in yourself. And that's where I would like to see St. James to go. However, the environment is very difficult in the sense
Mhm.
that, I mean, we're the seventh largest school, but there are schools that are probably 10 times bigger than us when it comes to
Mhm.
revenue, at least. And they have a lot
Mhm.
more clout, and that's their CEOs are thinking exactly like how everybody else thinks. I'm
Yep.
here for 3 years. I need to make a name for myself. I want a board to approve my compensation package, whatever that might be. And
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
compensation package, who knows what it might be? It might be very ridiculous. But
Yep.
there are very, very few people who truly think of society the way it should be thought of, which is
Yep.
as a collective. And
Mhm.
as we collectively work together,
Mhm.
everybody's life should improve and not just one person making a $50 billion paycheck.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and again, I've spoken to several CEOs, Fortune 500 CEOs, Fortune 100 CEOs, or C-level executives. There's a very bizarre exceptionalism to their habits. So, for
Right.
example, there was this interview I read about Bill Gates, and Bill Gates said
Mhm.
that, oh yeah, I mean, sure, I fly private jets and I'm causing a lot of greenhouse gases. However, all the stuff that I'm doing is compensating for that. And I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, what
Mm.
kind of a
Is it really?
delusional world does this man actually live in?
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
he thinks that he's saying that I'm better than everybody else, so
Yep.
I deserve the right to fly private no matter
Yeah.
where I
Oh.
go, no
Oh my
matter what my
goodness.
climate activism is.
Precisely. Oh my goodness.
And that
What?
sort of exceptionalism and mindset is, I think, what the true bane of corporate
Yes.
finance is.
Yes. And it's bleeding into everywhere. It's bleeding
Yeah.
into the people who just wants to live a good life.
Right.
We just want a
Exactly.
sustainable life. You guys
Exactly.
are
And
just hoarding everything.
yes. And that's what I want St. James to be, is essentially a beacon of humility, so to speak.
Mm,
If you come and
mm,
study here, know where you came from. If you become a doctor and you make oodles and oodles of money, give back. That's what we tell our students all the time.
mm.
Give back to students. At one point, you were in a
Wow.
situation where
Wow.
you didn't go to school in the United States. You went to a Caribbean school, and somebody helped you. Somebody must have opened some doors for you, which is why you're where you're at. You couldn't have
Wow.
entirely done it on your own. And
Wow.
we always tell our graduates, please recognize that. And when you see somebody else knocking on your door, whether they're from St. James or any other place, pass it, pay it forward. And that
Yeah.
has such a big, effect, not just on you and on your mental health, but just generally
Yeah.
across society.
Precisely. Precisely. And you guys are. This is exact. I love that this is the mission. I love that this is, you're seeing success in this model with St. James, and I cannot. I cannot. I wish nothing more. I hope you guys succeed further. Than to see this kind of model succeed in the future and help a lot more people. Kaushik, I'd like to just give you this opportunity. Where can we find out more about St. James School of Medicine? Where can we learn about you? Where can we keep up where you most active in?
Absolutely. So our school website is
Okay.
www.sjsm.org. That's
Okay.
St. James School of
Mm-hmm.
Medicine.org.
Mm-hmm.
And all our information is up there. We also have a podcast called Med School Minutes,
All
where we
right.
talk about all our alumni and all the trailblazers that have done amazing things
Mm-hmm.
in the world. And it's truly fascinating to hear some of the stories where how they're so focused on giving back, and that's what truly makes everything worth it.
I
So, but again, if anybody is ever interested in medicine and always thought that this is an endeavor that they just cannot afford, I would encourage them to think again and look at schools like St. James. We are definitely one of if not the cheapest medical programs in North America, and we have over 800 practicing physicians across the United States
Hmm.
that will, because we always get, oh yeah, if you go to a Caribbean school, you're never going to be a physician, which is absolutely not true. We have 800 physicians who are practicing in USA and Canada to prove otherwise.
Wow. Well, Kaushik, I love it. I love the mission that you guys are and that you are continuing, of course. And thank you for being here on the show. Thank you for sharing all these insights and perspective. I definitely love the topic. I love that talking about all of this, and I love that there are voice and thought leaders and institutions like St. James that is trying to change this perspective and like fighting the good fight when it comes to you know corporate finance and economic inequalities and all that. But more than that, uplifting those who need it the most. Thank you, Goshek, for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Joshua.
To all our audience and listeners out there, hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. See you on the next one.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.